visit us on the web at zoo.wtf.
Welcome back, fellow zoos. I have the distinct honor of welcoming Dr. Hani Miletski to our podcast. Welcome, Hani.
Hello, hello. It's good to be here.
Yeah, we're super excited. For those of you who are living under a rock, Hani Miletski is the author of Understanding Bestiality and Zoophilia, which is the first work of its kind, actually looking into our community. Among other super cool things, you did a book about mother-son incest, and you were a practicing sex therapist. All right. Now, one thing that I want to tell you, actually two things. One, when I visited my sex therapist and told them about the podcast, they actually texted me your name and said, "Why don't you interview Hani Miletski?"
You had to go to your therapist to get that idea?
Oh, no. We've been wanting to that's the other thing I wanted to say, is that you were like our number one person we've ever wanted to interview. So, like, this is super thrilling to actually have you on this time. So I really appreciate you taking your time.
It's my pleasure.
So let's start with just a short overview of your professional background and your work. What led you to study zoophiles?
Well, I was in school doing my PhD, and I was supposed to figure out a topic to do my dissertation on. And I started working around the same time with this guy who was a zoo. And I tried to find information to figure out what to do with him because I had no idea. And the only thing I could find was, what's the name of that book about the mayor?
Oh, The Horseman.
The Horseman, yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that really moved me. And I decided that I am going to study that topic.
Oh, wow. That's super cool. And of course, it kind of evolved from a case study to something much bigger. You wrote an entire book.
Yeah. So with so many participants, when I was in the school, which was in San Francisco, I started telling people that this is going to be my topic. And I said, if you have anybody, send them over. Right now, I only have one case. I was okay with doing just a case study, but of course, it's more interesting if I could find more people.
Right.
And then one day, I got a phone call from this lovely woman, and she told me that she was a zoo. And she said, do you want to come and meet with me? I'm in DC, I'm visiting. So I met with her in person. We had a lovely lunch. And then she told me that she and her boyfriend, who was also a zoo, could hook me up on the internet, which was like news to me. You know, it was the beginning of the internet. And I'm very technologically challenged.
You did fine.
You did great today. You really did.
So they came to my home and connected me to the internet. And I was in a chat room with a lot of zoos from all over the world, which was so exciting. Can you imagine? First of all, it was my first introduction to the internet. And secondly, to get to talk to so many, it was really an amazing experience. And from there, people started calling me and volunteering to be in the study. And I ended up with 82 men and 11 women.
All right.
Who responded. I had more, but some people did not send it back.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
And this would have been a paper survey back then, wouldn't it?
Yeah. They had to give me their actual address, and I sent it to them. They had to fill it out. It was, I think, 30 pages long.
Oh, my goodness.
It was huge. and then send it back to me, put postage and take it to the post office and send it back to me.
Oh, my goodness. We actually have a couple of people who have worked with our podcast who were actually in your original study.
That's cool.
Yeah. Now, my understanding, you have been interviewed by another super fantastic podcast, Renegade Ape, pretty recently. My understanding is that part of your ASEC training, bestiality and zoophilia was covered at some point, or at least mentioned a little bit, just so you're prepared to respond if someone came to you with that actual issue.
Right. In order to become a certified sex therapist by ASEC, everyone has to go through what is called Sexual Attitude Reassessment, or SAR, which is usually a 2-day minimum workshop in which we get exposed to all kinds of sexual behaviors And then we talk about it in small groups, just how we feel about it and reactions and so forth. Just to kind of, first of all, expose us to whatever's going out there. And then for us to reassess how we feel about it. Can we work with that kind of situation, with that kind of person, and maybe be more prepared?
What was that experience like, being exposed to all those things?
Well, I can tell you that when I was in school in San Francisco, one of the questions that they asked us in one of the classes was, what clients do you think you cannot work with? So I said, people who have sex with animals or with children.
Well.
And then I get this client who actually came to me after nobody wanted to work with him. And my heart went out to him. And I started working with him, and I saw that I can actually empathize, and I could work with him.
Wow.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, that's such an interesting transformation there, how someone's actual case can completely change how you feel about the subject.
The thing is that everyone, when they think about sex with animals, they immediately think that people are torturing the animal.
Right.
That's the first thing that comes to their mind. And when you're able to see it in a different way, then things change.
So since then, have other therapists or other professionals sought your advice about zoophilia when they go into their own work?
Yes. I've had several therapists from all over the country, actually all over the world, contact me with questions and supervision, because I also supervise other therapists.
When you're supervising other therapists, what opportunities does that present to incorporate what you've learned? What kind of things do you see that you were able to provide as guidance?
Well, I think, like I said, the most important thing is to change the way you look at it, to change your perception. It's not necessarily abuse. There are cases where there is, but in most cases that I've encountered, it's not. And in my experience, the people who have sex with animals actually really love their animals. They treat them as partners. Some of them have married them. So it's very different. And when people hear this, they're like, oh my God, they never thought about it that way.
It's basically you're taking them through that same reassessment that you would have gone through ASEC training, right?
Right.
Now, obviously, your research led to a whole book. A bunch of people came to you and gave you all that information. And you expressed hope that it would spark awareness and interest in others to do more work in the area revolving around zoophilia and bestiality. Do you think that has succeeded?
Well, around the time that I was doing my dissertation and shortly after it was published, there were a few studies about the subject.
I know there was Beetz, right? At some point?
Andrea Beetz from Germany. Then there was Weinberg and
Williams.
Weinbergs and Williams. Williams and Weinberg.
Right. Okay.
And there were a few others. There actually have been some more recent studies about zoophilia.
Oh, really? I know of Bailey.
I don't know that I have the name because I was the one who was editing it, and it has to be double blind. I cannot know who that is.
Right. Totally fine. That's really cool. I love that you're part of editing newer research into bestiality.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is that your work is cited pretty regularly in newer stuff. So it comes up over and over again for us. That's actually how I found the book years ago. It was a reference in something else that I was reading.
Yeah, if you look up zoosexuality online, it's almost as if you basically coined the term yourself because you're cited as the one who brought it into popularity. I believe someone else coined it before you. Is that right?
Zoosexuality? I did not make it up. I found it somewhere.
Obviously, you're now cited in a lot of works. Where did doing this book and taking the time to actually look into this community that had not been looked into very often before, where did that take your career from there?
Well, it didn't really change much, except that I've been asked to talk a lot about it. I was going to continue to be a sex therapist, and I have. And I love what I do. And it hasn't really changed anything. Maybe made me a little more known.
Yeah?
I would say so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we all know who you are.
Has your thinking on zoophilia changed at all since you wrote the book? Have you ever thought about following up with a second edition or another project?
No, it was so much work. And
Oh, yes.
I feel that.
bet.
I feel that so much. I feel it in my bones. So our topic today is on mental health and therapy. So mental health and human sexuality are both highly stigmatized, and of course, zoophilia being no exception to that. Did you experience any pushback from your peers or your social groups about your work when you started working on your project?
Oh, yeah. At the time, I was working for an organization. It was a nonprofit organization that provided sex therapy and training. And we had staff meetings every week. Mm-hmm. And at one of the staff meetings, I announced that this is going to be my dissertation topic. Mm-hmm. And for the next hour, everybody was really getting on my case that it's the stupidest thing that I could ever do, and that I will be pigeonholed into this topic, and I'm never going to have any clients come to me for sex therapy, and they're all going to think that I'm weird or whatever. And it was tough. Everybody was sort of like against me or against the topic.
Did they ever get in your way?
No.
That's good.
No. They respected my decision, but they tried very hard to persuade me not to do this. But once they saw that I am determined, well, I mean, they didn't stand in my way.
So obviously you were determined. How do you respond when people tell you, this is a terrible idea, don't do this?
Well, I tend to think for myself. Like when I go to buy something in the store, I can try it on and ask everybody in the store what they think about it. And then I will make my own decision, even if it was opposite of what everybody told me. I like to ask.
I want to know how you feel, but it may or may not have any outcome on what I actually do.
Exactly. So I was very intrigued and I was curious and I like challenges. So I went for it. And I'm very glad I did.
Yeah, we're super glad too.
Yeah. It sounds like their concern was that you would maybe constrain yourself to a niche topic and you would risk becoming the person.
And nobody else will want to come and work with me.
Right. Does it seem like that happened? Like, are you the one to talk to about this? Like, how often does zoophilia actually come up in your practice?
It doesn't come up very often. But actually what happened was that now when people come to see me, and they have something that they're very ashamed of or embarrassed, they would say to me something like, well, we know what you studied, so we can probably tell you anything. You heard everything already. So in a way, it actually helped. People feel that they can really open themselves up to me, and they know I'm not judgmental, and I can work with anything.
Yeah, you can count me in that group. That was the first email I wrote, in fact.
Oh, really?
Yep. When I was just getting started on my own search, when I contacted you, Hani, I had an account set up just for that. But that was the only time that I mentioned that I was looking for some care for zoophilia as part of my sexuality. With everybody else after that, it happened on the phone. So yeah, that absolutely makes sense to me. I did have a sense of safety doing it.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
So we're curious now what you think about the state of sex therapy, not just for zoophiles, but for everybody. So do you see that there's more professional awareness now than when you first started? Is support improving or worsening?
Well, I can tell you that there are a lot more sex therapists these days than there used to be.
Well, that's good. Now, I have heard that this is something that my therapist had mentioned to me while we were talking, that you have a sex-certified sex therapist, but there are also other sex therapists that are sometimes focused on things like sex addiction and things like that. When you think about the state of sex therapy, do they even count when you think about what a sex therapist is? Or like, how do you factor them into the state of how things are going?
Well, the thing is that anybody can say that they are a sex therapist. Right? I mean, what are you going to do? And there are therapists who even have certifications as sex addictions therapists, which basically in general oppose that. But even within asect, some people believe in sex addiction. I mean, it's different individuals and everyone is different.
Right.
But basically, what asect strives is to have people understand that sexuality is healthy.
Right.
That it's positive, and to come at it from that perspective. Yes, sometimes people hurt because of sexual issues, and sometimes they have problems. But if you don't shame them, if you don't make them feel that sex is bad, but try to work with them and help them, that's a better outcome than to shame them and say, you shouldn't do this.
Right. It almost seems like that should be obvious, right?
Well, a lot of people have issues with sex. There's a lot of prudishness.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So that goes straight to what I think is the core of ASEC's mission then, is this different approach to what healthy sexuality is and what it should be called and how to address problems when they come up. Is there anything else that sets an ASEC certified therapist apart from the others? Maybe an ethical difference or a change in methods?
Well, I think it's really the standards of training. We have to go through a lot of training. We have to do this SAR that I mentioned before, which is a minimum of 2 days. Sometimes it's a week long.
Oh, wow.
Oh, okay.
We have to go through, I think that they change it all the time, but it's about 90 hours of human sexuality training, and then 60 hours on how to do sex therapy from different perspectives.
Oh, wow.
And then we have to be in supervision for at least 50 hours. In my time, it was 100 hours.
Oh, wow.
There's a lot of hoops that people have to go through in order to become certified. It's not that simple.
And before all of that, you already have to be a psychotherapist.
Right. You have to be a licensed therapist, and you have to have experience with just working with people on any other issues.
So it's very rigorous. Yeah. It's like you're taking college courses just for the certification as well.
So you mentioned that there are a lot more sex therapists now than 20, 30 years ago. But in the case where an ASEC certified therapist isn't available to somebody driving distance or through telehealth, are there specific qualities or qualifications or keywords that a zoo could look for on somebody's homepage to try to improve their chances of finding somebody that will help them?
I think being open to working with LGBTQ, all that kind of stuff, basically working with different orientations, being open-minded, maybe mention of some kinks, that would show some open-mindedness.
Right.
And not being judgmental.
So basically, you're looking for someone who has experience dealing with queer identities, has experience dealing with kinks, and views kinks in a sex-positive way. You're looking for definitely someone who mentions some form of positive queer sex therapy background.
Right.
Right. Someone who calls out kink knowledge or
sex positive.
Yep.
So here's an interesting question, Hani. We know what the DSM says about zoophilia. At this point, we're at the point where it's only a clinical thing if it causes distress.
Right.
But in your experience, when do you think zoophilia becomes a significant issue for someone?
When they feel stressed out about it. It's really very subjective.
It really is that simple, though.
Yeah, I mean, when they are tormented by it, when they don't want it, they feel shame or any of those negative feelings, then it becomes a problem.
So, like, sometimes people might not be right out to say, I don't want zoophilia at all, or they might have trouble communicating exactly how they feel or what the problem is. So what types of things might you ask someone in a consultation to arrive at the idea that, hey, maybe this is clinically significant?
Well, if anybody would come to see me because of zoophilia, they will probably tell me in advance that they're not happy about it.
So you found that the zoos that you have seen have been really forward about that issue. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting. And the reason why it's interesting is we've talked to a number of zoos about therapy, and there's a lot of reluctance to mention zoophilia at the get-go.
Well, yeah, but that's the difference with me because they all know that
That's true.
They
That's
can
true.
tell me. So they start right away with whatever's going on.
That's interesting.
You know, I had a lot of zoos over the years who came to see me from far away to work on other issues. But they wanted to see me because they wanted to be completely open and authentic.
Right. Let me ask you this. If someone who's listening right now is not sure whether therapy is a good idea for them, what signs do you think that they should look for in their own lives? Obviously, dissatisfaction. I feel like there's a lot of reluctance, and a lot of people might say, for instance, I feel bad about this, but I'm afraid of therapy, basically. There's a fear of therapists in our community. And have you run into that fear before?
Oh, definitely. Not with me, but people who are telling me about it.
Right. What kind of things do they share?
Well, the fear is really that they're going to be reported or they're going to be judged or maybe even abandoned.
Abandoned.
That's what happened to this client of mine. No therapist wanted to work with him once they found out what he was doing.
Oh.
So that's very scary. You know, you open yourself up and then you get this reaction. It's very hurtful. I mean, it's traumatizing. So I do think that therapy is a good thing. And I think everybody should be in therapy, in my opinion.
I feel that. I feel the same way.
Absolutely.
But I think it's important to find the right person because most of the treatment, most of the therapy is actually the relationship between the therapist and the client.
Right.
Right.
It doesn't matter what modality they use and what they say and all that. It's really the relationship.
Right.
So,
Okay. Yeah. Trust really is the foundation of all of this, isn't it?
right. And it's the chemistry.
Right.
Right.
So sometimes it's trial and error. They have to try and go to several therapists, maybe not share about the zoophilia right away, but kind of check the waters to make sure that the person can actually hear this and accept it
Right.
and go from there.
Yeah. We have a question about that also, but I think since we covered a lot of things about how open zoos tend to be with you, I'm wondering whether or not you think or you found that zoophilia is really any different from other sexuality issues when you're treating them. Is it really a special case?
Not really. Everyone who has something that they're not comfortable with in terms of letting the world know what they're doing feels that it's a huge secret, and they usually feel shame about it, and they feel like they don't want to do it, but they can't help themselves and so forth. So basically it's the same thing. It's just a different thing that they are into sexually.
Right.
So it really comes down to that secret they can't divulge to anyone that's eating them up.
Right.
Yeah. This is what we found for a lot of zoos that we know, is that just talking about it in any context is very hard.
Even among zoos, like zoos talking to zoos about it.
Yep. And there's really terrible reasons for that, which, I mean, we're all aware of. But
There's also the issue of values. Some people do think that they shouldn't have sex with animals because it's a different species, because the Bible says so, because of all kinds of reasons. So that's another complication.
yeah, trying to manage the attraction with permissible behavior, if any. So, but to get back to trust and confidentiality, what kinds of things can people feel safe revealing to a therapist that they're thinking about working with right away? What's okay to discuss?
Well, first of all, I do not think that having sex with animals is a reportable offense.
Right. So far, we have found that seems to be the case.
Right.
At least in the U.S.
Yeah. I don't know that all therapists know that.
Right.
But
I'm pretty sure not all of them do.
yeah, because those are the questions that I get a lot. But it's really not reportable. And so there's no reason to be afraid. There shouldn't be a reason to be afraid of being reported for that. But of course, you need to find the right therapist. who understands that. What I told one of my supervisee, another therapist recently, was that there's no reason to know exactly what the client is doing. It's enough to talk about the fact that he's in love with his dog, he has sex with his dog, he doesn't hurt the dog, or whatever else he wants to share. There's no need to share all the details, the sexual details.
Right. I don't think I would be inclined to share every last...
that would make me super uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah, but some people do.
But
really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's like they want to talk about it. They found somebody that they can talk to, so they start just saying everything.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, actually.
Yeah, I've been there.
Yeah, and so I told the therapist, you just tell him. You don't have to tell me everything.
So that's interesting. So it sounds like there really isn't much of a limit about what somebody can discuss. Like, it doesn't have to just be hypothetical. It can be a real relationship that's ongoing. They can be sexually active.
Yeah.
Now, again, I think we should put a disclaimer here, because we have listeners all over the world. We are discussing the U.S. situation. It is very probable that other countries may have different things. We've discussed this a little bit before, so keep that in mind. But as a lot of our listeners are in the U.S., it is super interesting to hear, talking about the actual act of sexuality. I think people are really afraid to talk about that and how that might get them in trouble. So that's really neat to hear.
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about what trouble is it going to get them in.
Well, I think that we have the specter of, like, what we do is illegal in the U.S. I believe now we have a case where it is federally illegal at this point. And so the fear of doing something illegal also comes with, for zoos, it's not just we might go to jail, it's what happens to our partners. Because if we get in trouble, our partners can be taken, they can be euthanized, we might never see them again. And so that's the fear. I have someone to protect, basically, and not just myself.
Right. But if you find the right therapist who understands that these are not reportable actions, then it's okay to talk about it. Again, not in detail, but it's okay to talk about it, in my opinion.
So it's interesting you were talking about the detail and things like that. So how do you and your clients talk about and set boundaries? Does that question make sense? Like, you decide, here's the scope of what we're doing, what we're talking about, and things like that.
So again, I did not have this issue. It was a supervisee of mine, another therapist, who did not know how to handle this person who started talking and just vomited all this information.
Oh my goodness.
So I told her to tell him to not go into details, that it's enough that she knows that he's doing whatever he's doing, and let's talk about something else. What is the issue that he wants to talk about?
Right. Bringing him back into focus. Like, you were here for a reason, and it is not to tell me the tawdry details of your sex life.
Right.
If someone is already seeing a therapist or a clinician, I know that, I was already seeing a psychiatrist, for instance, and wants to talk about zoophilia with their provider, and they haven't yet, what kinds of things could they ask, or even should they ask first?
Of the therapist?
Yeah. So, like, let's say I have not just broached this kind of topic with someone I've already seen. I'm very comfortable with the person I'm seeing. What kind of questions should I ask first before starting to divulge any information about zoophilia?
You can ask, what are you responsible to report? Just an open-ended question. What kind of things you need to report if I told you something?
Right. I think that is the root of the fear, I guess.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the possible concerns with doing that, in my experience with different therapists over the years, all of them have had very accurate and sensitive BS meters. So if I start hinting that something is going on that I haven't talked about yet, but then I drop it because I wasn't satisfied with the answer, I wonder whether there's any tension that arises from that, like maybe the authenticity between that partnership suffers a little bit.
I think it's a good sign not to continue to work with that therapist.
Oh, so, fair enough.
Yeah.
If you cannot be authentic, what's the point?
Problem solved.
Yeah. Well, Then you have to find someone, right? But it's a very direct answer to that problem.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the reporting mandates are different in every state in the United States. But generally speaking, therapists are supposed to report any suspected child abuse or neglect or elder abuse or neglect. Or if we find out that somebody's going to kill somebody.
Right.
Right.
So you can always follow up with, what about animals?
Yep.
And see their reaction.
That's very close to what I did personally. As part of the intake process, there was a long discussion about each of our responsibilities over the course of our sessions and what topics would get close to the line that would be a problem. And my therapist solution was basically to say, these are the things that I mandated to report. And it's exactly as you described. And because I'd already asked him about his position on zoophilia, he went out of his way to make sure that there weren't any concerns with it.
Good.
And said, this is not even close to my personal limits. I don't anticipate there being a problem. There certainly isn't a legal problem. And if we're getting close, then I'll let you know.
Good.
And
That's
that
a
was
good
it.
therapist.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. For some of our people who have not had experience with therapy, and unfortunately in the U.S., that's a lot of people, what does a typical therapy session involve? Like, do we set goals? Is it just a conversation? Is it different for every single person?
It's different for every person and every therapist. Every therapist works differently. There's different modalities, there's different personalities. Everyone works differently.
Right. I think, Toggle, you mentioned that yours assigns homework. That's something I haven't had yet. What about you, Hani? Is there ever a homework assignment?
I like to give homeworks.
Oh.
But usually it's when people have difficulty with sexual activity.
Okay. So it's
then
more...
I give them home play. It's more home play than homework to try different things.
A little spicy.
Okay, so it's not like a worksheet with questions or...
Oh, no, I don't get anything like that either.
Okay.
No.
My first bit of homework was, what are your goals? Figure that out and tell me.
Yeah.
Which is a fair question, right? So I think it's fair to say that therapy is work. It's a process. So what kind of outcomes do your clients try to achieve? When would you say, okay, we're done here? When is it finished?
Well, whenever I have a new client, I always ask them what they want to work on. And then I ask them, what is it going to look like when you got what you wanted, when you achieved that goal? Not always it's very clear.
Right.
Because sometimes it's just, I want to understand something better. So when do you know that you actually finished understanding? But again, it's a very subjective feeling. And sometimes I feel the same. And we just have a conversation that I think I had enough. I got a lot out of it. And now I want to go out there on my own and see how I'm doing.
Yeah, fair enough. So it can be a soft thing. So like, I'm going to see how I'm doing. And if I need you, I'll call you again.
Definitely. Yeah.
I like that.
So mine is similar. So I went in with a fairly open-ended approach. I think I explained it like trying to contextualize zoophilia with the rest of my sexuality and try to form it into something that's cohesive and functional. And I have no idea how long it's going to take to figure that out. But at some point, I expect there will be a moment where I realize that I'm in a better place than I was when I started. And that would come out in our conversations anyway. And there would be a talk about there, like, how are you feeling about these things now? Do you think you're in a place where you're happier and ready to try things out without me? And that day is coming. I don't know when. So yeah, for me, it would be a question whether or not I was as distressed about certain external factors. So something that we find is that zoos can experience distress from an internal or an external source, or both at once.
Or both, right.
And before you wrote your book, as you said, your plan was a case study about one person who was distressed about their behavior and wanted to stop. But others are totally comfortable with their sexual expression and they struggle with something else like social pressure or hate
Right.
or
Twitter.
or Twitter. Oh my God, Twitter. So have you found that these two different kinds of people benefit from the same approach, or are there fundamental differences that you have to address there?
Well, like I said, I had several people who came to see me to talk about other issues. So, yes, I mean, we talk about in the beginning, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And we take it from there. It doesn't really matter, what they come in for. If I can help them, I'll do my best.
Right. So you kind of start with the same sort of approach. What are we trying to achieve? Where are we going? And then we go from there, like we discussed just a little while ago.
Yeah.
But I wonder if I'm saying, like, my problem is I don't want to be a zoo anymore. Is it ever really the problem that you're going to want to solve? Like, we're going to solve your zoophilia? Or are you thinking it's more of an immutable characteristic when it comes to that kind of a sexuality?
I believe it's a sexual orientation. So
I believe that too.
Yep, count me in.
So I'm going to try to help that person understand that it's a sexual orientation, that it's not going away. That he has a choice if he wants to engage in sexual behavior with animals or not. But the feelings are probably never going to go away. And then support him with that and help him deal with that.
Right. Have you ever seen an instance where zoophilia or acts of bestiality were a manifestation of some other issue?
I have not, but there's a lot of about it in the literature, especially when it comes to sexual abuse of animals.
Right.
Yep.
I'm sure you're aware of that.
Unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it sounds like your approach and the approach that a sex therapist will take anyway, regardless of individual differences, is that this is really a cooperative effort and there's a lot of flexibility even in setting goals. And it may not be so strange to end up in a totally different place than where either of you thought you would be.
And it's very common that happens.
Yeah.
Somebody comes in and they want to work on one thing and we start talking and it turns out that there's all these other issues that are related somehow. And you cannot ignore those issues. So we have to deal with everything. And before you know it, we're talking about something completely different.
Yeah. So is that ever a point of tension? Like what happens if there's a disconnect between what somebody comes to you for help with and what you or their therapist, whoever it is, wants to work on in that moment? How does that get resolved?
Yeah, sometimes they wonder about it. And I explain to them that sex does not happen in a vacuum.
Right.
I think everything that happens to you, everything that surrounds you, has something to do with your sexual being.
Right.
And if you're depressed, if you're anxious, if you have problems with somebody in your family or even at work, it all affects your sexuality.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. You say that and somehow that may not seem obvious, but at the same time, if you have a shitty day at work, maybe you don't want to come home and have sex. And maybe if you're always miserable at work, you never feel like you're in the mood. So I can see how that might happen.
Right. Or vice versa. Maybe you want to have a lot of sex to forget everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And that can cause strain in your relationship if the other person's not down to clown. So here's an interesting thing that we have run into, and that is someone going into a therapy situation and trying to explain, for instance, that this is how I feel about this. And the therapist is like, you're ignoring the actual problem here, which is your zoophilia, that sort of a thing. And I think that sometimes, therapy isn't actually voluntary. Conditions are set on a particular result for the client. So if they are in court-mandated therapy, for instance, and that experience can be pretty destructive. We talked about a couple of people that were in some pretty horrific situations that were considered therapy.
Yeah, when it's mandated, it's really bad. And I have worked with people, not zoophiles, but other people that had to be in therapy. And the approach that I took with them was to find something that they want to work on. that may or may not be related to why they're there or why they were sent to me. And at least started with that.
Yes. So for your approach, when someone comes to you and is court mandated or otherwise required, you're like, okay, so you obviously don't think that that's the problem. Let's talk about something. And kind of build that relationship.
Build a relationship so that he feels that he got something out of it. Because otherwise there's all this resentment, and the last thing they want to do is be there with me.
Yeah, that seems to be the thing that all of the stories that we know about where therapy wasn't, shall we say, voluntary. And that is, there's a really big difference between telling your own story on your own terms and being
forced to.
Yeah, or being caught and never having that chance and being in a position where now you have to explain yourself instead.
Or being forced to say something that you don't believe is true.
Yeah, that's very sad.
There is someone who reached out to us who was caught having sex with an animal, and there was a plea deal, and part of it was court-mandated therapy. He had to go through programs that were designed for pedophiles, stop programs like in England, and his therapist was basically, he'd say, you know, this is my sexuality, this is how I feel, and they're like, no, you're wrong. You should basically be ashamed of this. You need to come to terms with the fact that there's something wrong with you and deal with that.
It's terrible.
So what advice as a mental health professional could you give someone in that situation to survive that kind of experience?
Find another therapist.
Can you do that in a court-mandated situation?
Well, maybe you cannot leave that particular therapist, but maybe you can get another therapist to help you deal with the other therapist.
Right.
Yeah. It's actually very close to what I suggested that they do.
Yeah, we did look around a bit. But it sounds like, Hani, your approach in that situation with a client would be to try to dismantle the adversarial nature of those first sessions and just find something to do.
Because, like I said, the most important thing is the relationship.
Right.
And if we don't have a good relationship and the person is resentful about being there, we won't be able to do anything.
Right.
Now, if someone were to come to you as that second therapist in that situation, what advice might you give them if you were going to talk to them about, for instance, being in the situation I just described and they came to you with that problem?
That's a really good question. I would try to get permission to talk to the other therapist and put some sense into their brains. But to the particular client, off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe I could help them disassociate in the session. You know, when the therapist says something stupid, to just say to yourself, well, here he goes again, or here she goes again, and just not pay attention and choose to talk about what they want to talk about.
Interesting.
Okay, so you would be looking for ways to give some control back to your client if they were still... that it didn't occur to me when we were writing these questions to ask you that it's possible to have two different therapists at the same time. But of course it makes sense. It might actually be better than the alternative that I imagined, where the second therapist, you or someone else, is really just there to put pieces back together.
We do it a lot when we work with couples. You know, then sometimes it's very useful for each one of them, or at least one of them, to have their own individual therapist to help process what's going on with the other therapist. And
someone who is only in their corner.
Yeah.
Right. Wow. I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. But I guess the message here is it's don't give up hope completely.
And try to make the best out of it.
Right.
Come up with another issue that you have. You're dealing with your boss or whatever, and talk about that.
All right.
I'm absolutely sharing that with the person that I'm thinking of right now. I hope that gives him a little bit of control back, because hearing him talk about it is heartbreaking. So I truly, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate your insight on that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm glad I can help.
I want to give you a chance to say anything, any final thoughts you might have? Particularly, this is a chance to speak to like zoophiles all over the world. Is there anything that you would want to say?
Wow. That's like being on this chat room.
Right.
When I first started. It's an honor. It really is. And especially the people who were in my study. I mean, I owe them so much. I could not have done it without them, and I could not have been where I am now without them.
Well, I will tell you, a couple of them have reached out and wanted to say hi and to thank you for allowing them to participate.
That would be great.
I also want to give you a chance. Obviously, people can reach out through your website, drmilletski.com.
And doctor is just DR, no period.
Uh-huh. And are you working on any other projects today? You have the Understanding Zoophilia and Bestiality. You have a book about mother and son incest. What's it called?
Mother-son incest, the unthinkable broken taboo persists.
Interesting. So that's another work you've done. Are you working on anything special right now?
I am working on an illustrated book about vanilla couples, heterosexual couples, who want to stay together for a long time and still enjoy one another.
Oh,
nice.
So each page will be another drawing, a really nice drawing with a tip, an idea about something to do.
Oh, wow. Do you have a working title?
It used to be Let's Make Love, but I think I'm going to change that.
Fair enough.
That's going to be hard to top.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's more than just Let's Make Love. It's about a relationship.
Right.
So I have to come up with something else. Do you have any ideas?
Let's see. So it's about longevity in a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Let's see.
How to keep it fresh.
The word everlasting is in my head, and I can't get rid of it.
That's a good one. It's a good word. Mm-hmm. I was thinking like
I'm taking
the
notes.
idea of falling in love, like always being in love, like where people say things like, I love her as much as I did the first day I laid eyes on her, that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
I don't have the catchy title. I'm not that quick, but I hope that it helps.
Yeah, it gives me something to work with. Thank you.
I might think of something overnight.
Okay, you can email me.
All right.
And where would people find that once it's done?
Probably on my website and on Amazon.
On your website and Amazon. So look for a new book by Dr. Milletski at drmilletski.com. Is there anything else you want to say at the end?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You have no idea
for
what an
taking
honor
the
this
time.
is.
Same here.
We're so excited to have you. I really appreciate you coming, and maybe one day we can have you back again.
That would be great.
Thanks for coming, Dr. Milletski. We'll be back with more Zooier Than Thou right after this.
Okay.